As a society, I don't think we realize how often we're just on autopilot. And a few years ago, I started to ask myself, who said that, as a way to kind of break out of this groupthink mindset and truly start to make the best decisions for me in my own life. This podcast episode is going to talk about how you can break out of that mindset and live more authentically too. Welcome back to Cosmosis or Whatever. I'm your host, Celia, aka Celia Marie 1243. In this podcast, we talk all things spiritual, mystical, magical, healing, life-changing. Today's topic, actually, I was supposed to do it like a long time ago. It was actually supposed to be like the very first episode. And then I think I also recorded another version of it, and this is like the third time that I'm trying to do it. Third time's a charm, right? So basically what I want to talk about today is how the universe is a buffet and the world is your oyster, and we should be treating it as such. I think a lot of people would also refer to this as breaking out of the matrix, right? But the part that I really want to focus on is realizing that there is no one truth. Everybody has a different, unique approach, perspective, and I think that we should all be, and see, even me saying that, right? We should all, it's different, and we can all approach it in different ways. We have so many gurus and, people, celebrities, whoever telling us like, oh, well, you should do this. This is the best way to lose weight. And then I think a lot of us take things as Bible. And I'm using that on purpose because I think this also kind of relates to some of like the religious trauma that I have and other people have. If it feels like I'm kind of going a little bit squirrel on this episode, it's because my script is a little bit looser than it usually is. And that's actually because of the topic that we're talking about. Like, I have really lately, for me, one question that I've been asking myself a lot is like, who said that, right? Like, who told you that this is how this thing was supposed to be? It's like, oh, well, I had this plan for my life when I was younger of like how everything was supposed to go. And if I really look back at it, I don't think it was as influenced by me as I thought it was back in the day. So for example, I'm a teenager, young adult, and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is going to be great. I was engaged by, I think I was 19, like freshly 19 when I got engaged. I got engaged at 19 and I was like, okay, well, perfect. I'll be married by the time I'm 19, and then I'll have, my first kids by the time I'm 21, and then I'll have my first house by the time I'm 25, and I want to have my last kids by the time I'm 30. And friend, here I am, I'm 30 years old and I am not married. I don't have a house. And I think for a little while, that really kind of didn't sit well with me, that I was still single, but I had to kind of look at it. I mean, I'm in a relationship. Let's clarify that. I'm in a relationship, but I'm not married. But I really had to kind of take a look at my life. And I'd say that started to happen for real, maybe like a couple years ago, where I really just sat and looked at my life and I'm like, okay, but who said that, right? Like, who said that I had to be married by 19 and that I had to be, have kids by this certain age? And I think as I'm kind of releasing that pressure off of myself, I've realized so many other areas that I'm putting all of this pressure on myself to be a certain way. And why? Not because that's what's best for me and my well-being. It's because that's what I've learned. That's what society has pushed. That's what my parents have said. That's what I see people doing around me. And so I feel like this episode, I really just want to focus on the fact that you don't have to do anything like anybody. It's just a reminder for you. I am so happy with where my life is right now. I may not have ever seen this life that I'm living being an entrepreneur, um, you know, not being married yet, but living with my girlfriend, not owning a house yet, but having a cute little apartment that I'm loving, like getting to decorate, like even all those things are just bringing a tear to my eye. And I really hope that by listening to this episode, you guys will realize some of the ways that you've been maybe limiting yourself or holding yourself back from truly being happy just because society doesn't think that's how you're supposed to go about something. The universe really is Burger King, y'all. The universe really is a buffet where you can create your experience. And from a spiritual perspective, as somebody who taps into people's soul contracts, some of us, that is in our soul contract that we're supposed to discover, like, hey, I don't have to do things like other people. A lot of you listening to this are my generational curse breakers, right? People who are supposed to be doing things completely differently. And I think once we start releasing the expectations of everybody and really deciding what is best for me, that is what is going to kind of set us free. And I think we're going to stop feeling so uncomfortable, so pressured. And we just start viewing life as like a cosmic buffet. And we break out of the matrix. I don't always love that phrase because sometimes it sounds corny. I think just because it's overused now. But I feel like all of this thinking really comes with an open mind and opened third eye. Something that I've been recently doing too is kind of understanding my neurodivergency, right? I have ADHD, and I will say it hasn't been diagnosed. I came from a family where, you don't go to the doctor and ask those kinds of things because like nothing's wrong with you, right? Like, ooh, child, I didn't think I was going to cry. Okay. Yeah, maybe there's more there than I thought. But I remember, having a hard time in school, paying attention, especially, if you're just not interested. And if I can hear my mom's voice in my head saying like, there's nothing wrong with you. I thought I had ADHD as a kid because I would hear other people talk about it. And my mom's like, no, ADHD, you don't have that. Like, that's just for like bad kids who can't be controlled by their parents. They just, say that they have ADHD and then they pump them with a whole bunch of medicine and whatever. And so, for me, kind of relating with all of the symptoms of ADHD, I've kind of just like self-diagnosed. Lately, I have been just kind of looking at myself through the lens of somebody who is neurodivergent. And honestly, I've actually asked myself if I might be on the spectrum. I might be autistic, which is a whole nother story. But just through the lens of neurodivergence, I've been trying to figure out what that looks like for me, because I don't think the world was really designed for people who are neurodivergent or people who just want to go out of the norm. I'm thinking of the movie Divergent, actually. I watched it a little while ago and I've always really loved that movie, and I always really identified with that character, Tris, how she didn't really feel like she fit into one kind of category, and she just kind of like breaks out of it. And then you realize, it's all an experiment. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, definitely go watch that series. I think it was on like Hulu or something. I don't know. But just noticing that society is not built for everyone, right? Society was built for us to all kind of think a certain way, but you don't have to fit into that mold, and you don't have to feel bad if you don't fit into that mold, if that's not what's best for you. For example, the way that school is set up, right? I've been seeing a lot of stuff on the internet about people unschooling their kids, right? Not having them in a classroom all day, but rather kind of shaping their learning experiences according to what their curious little minds are being led to. And I like that concept because for me, I feel like that's what I help people do on a spiritual level, right? When I go in, when you guys come to me for mentorship and people are like, where do I start? I think it's advantageous for a lot of people in my position to be like, oh, well, this is where you start, but what I have to do is have a consultation with you. I have to check into your energy. I have to speak with your spirit guides and really get the guidance on what your specific path and energy kind of looks like at the moment. And that can change from time to time as well. There's so many different ways to go about things. And I would say just to follow your curiosities. What do you feel curious about? I do have like a base level of like, if you're trying to listen to your spirit guides, if you're trying to connect with your spirit guides, that's a whole different thing. But just kind of like, where do I start on my spiritual journey? That's so self-led. And I think we've also, as a society, become really reliant on rules, and I'm putting air quotes, because we feel like there are rules, and like if you go outside of those rules, then you're kind of like an outsider, and then everybody's kind of like looking at you. They've done all of those experiments where they'll have people in like social settings and they'll just start like doing something. I'm thinking of one where I saw people, they were in like a hospital, like waiting area. And there was like a bell that chimed every, 5-10 minutes. And the people in there were paid actors. And every time that the bell chimed, everybody stood up. And so you bring in people who are not part of the experiment. And what do? A lot of them just assimilated to what everybody else was doing. There wasn't a rhyme or reason. They weren't, asking why. They just did it because that's what everybody else was doing. So I'm just saying all this to make sure that you kind of look into your life and see where you might have kind of been on autopilot, whether that's in your beliefs. Oh, well, it's just always been this way. My mom was a doctor, my dad was a doctor, or, my parents always worked 9 to 5. So that's just what I assumed I had to do. Or even if your parents were like entrepreneurs, like, okay, well, I just assumed that I would do that. Not necessarily so. If that's not how your brain works, if that's not best for your lifestyle that you would like to have, then don't do it. Especially not, don't aim for that to be the only thing that you do. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices and do things a certain way for a certain period of time for whatever reason. But in the end, really just ask yourself, who told me that? Who said that this was the way that things were supposed to be? If we're all looking at an object from different points, we're going to see things differently. Based on our own experiences, we could look at the exact same thing and it can look completely different. You see those like art pieces or something like that. If you see like a cube, it'll have one design on one side, but you see somebody else on the other side of the cube and they might not see what you're talking about at all. So as you consider what your own truths look like, think about where those ideas come from and whether you actually agree with them. Do you have to have kids by a certain age? Do you have to have kids at all? Are certain foods good for you? One other thing that I've been doing lately is kind of paying attention to how my body feels when I'm eating certain foods. People say things like, oh, this is a superfood, this is a health food, but maybe your body doesn't react well to that food. You have to kind of take it into your own hands and make sure that you are coming from an angle of what feels good for me, what works for me. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of information out there about eating for my blood type. And again, I don't want to take any of that as Bible either. It's going to come with a lot of trial and error. You make sure that when you are going out in life, that you are taking information with a grain of salt, that you are always checking in with your own intuition, with your own spirit guides, with yourself, and ask yourself, okay, does that resonate for me? Like, oh, I just found out that this is like the best thing that you could do. Okay, well, is that the best thing for me? Maybe not. And maybe it worked really well for that person, but if you're not exactly that person, then it might not necessarily be the same. The truth is more subjective and circumstantial than I feel like we give it credit for. People say fire is hot, and maybe that sounds like a fundamental truth, but if you have never touched a fire, everyone saying it's hot just makes you believe it. And I also take this with a grain of salt too, because I feel like I'm personally one of those people. I know that if somebody tells me, hey, that's hot, I'm going to be like, oh, well, how hot is it? Like, don't touch the stove, Celia, that's really hot. And I'm like, okay, well, can I like hover my hand around it? And maybe that's not the best way of going about things, but I know for me, that's how I tend to learn. And is it always the best scenario that comes out of it? I think we've talked about this before in the episodes about timeline jumping, but like, just because a path is easy doesn't mean it's your highest path or your best path. Sometimes your best path looks like trial and error. So maybe there was something very essential that you had to learn from burning your hand on the stove, at an early age versus doing it later. So I just wanted to get all of that out. Make sure to let you guys know to take everything with a grain of salt. Look at your life, evaluate your beliefs, the things that you kind of automatically do, your schedule, what you eat, your expectations of yourself, especially, and really think, who said that? Is it your parents? Voice that is kind of in your head? Is it actually society? Did you see it somewhere and it just stuck? Really take all of that with a grain of salt and kind of start questioning yourself. Start unlearning all of these things that people are trying to force you into and really start to align with your true self. And I promise you, a lot of things are going to start to fall into place. They might fall apart first, not going to lie, when you start to do that, but they'll start to fall into place because it is all aligned. It is all connected. That's the premise of cosmosis. I don't think I've talked about cosmosis, but that's what cosmosis means, that everything in the universe is connected. So I'll leave you guys with that. Hopefully that was a helpful message. Let me know if you guys needed that message. You can leave, if you're listening to this on Spotify, you can leave a little comment in the little notes section. Let me know if that is something that makes sense for you, something that you needed to hear. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.